Hello. Welcome, 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 welcome. It is so good to have you with me today. We are just letting Iridology hop on. Hi, Katie. Gee, fancy meeting you here. I just had a little private meeting with Katie and she's with us on Instagram. So good to see you. That's fun. It's really fun to put a face to a name and to make those connections when we live literally across the continent from each other. Today we are talking about popular iridology versus holistic iridology, and I'm I'm absolutely couching that in the framework of popular iridology is what many of you would recognize as being North American or Jensenian, and holistic is the constitutional. I feel very well qualified to call them that because I've studied both of them and I know both of them well. So when we talk about holistic versus popular, it's safe to say that most holistic practitioners actually consider themselves to be holistic. But I have to ask that question, are they really? Are all people who practice more natural things truly holistic? And I ask that because I really don't believe they necessarily are. Okay, so hey there, just flipped my camera around for my Instagram audience. My name is Judith Cobb. I'm a master herbalist, a natural nutrition clinical practitioner, a certified comprehensive iridology instructor, and I've been in this business for 40 years. Yeah, this is what I did instead of doing the other things that I was preparing for, but that's okay. Over those years, I've studied a lot of different styles of iridology, and the two primary ones were Jensen, because that's what's available when I first started out. And after several years, when I decided that wasn't going to be my happy place, that was when I was blessed to study constitutional. We're going to look at a lot of eyes in the next few minutes, and we're going to talk about the differences between these styles of iridology. Just want to encourage you, if you're a practitioner and you would maybe you need some tips on building your business, or maybe COVID is taking its toll on your business, I'm going to encourage you to hop on over to bit.ly/3-professional-secrets. I know that's a real mouthful to say. Opt in for that, because that is going to give you the first 3 of 7 little tips that I have found really helpful, not only in building my business over the last 40 years, but really helpful in keeping it alive during these COVID challenges that we're facing. All righty. When I first started out as an iridologist in holistic health, literally in 1979 is when I started studying and going in that direction. The only type of iridology that was available to us where I live was Jensenian. And when you look at the maps, if you're familiar with Jensen's map, you'll recognize it right here. That's all that was available. That's what everyone was studying. That's what everybody was teaching. It's all that was openly available here where I live in Southern Alberta. Now, what you'll see here is that there are some other very accessible iridology maps, as in these are maps that you will find advertised in various places online. This is the new version of the Jensen map, and it's been updated by Ellen Tart Jensen. There have been some significant changes in it. We've got this one as well, Universal Iridology. I think this is Mickey Jones. I could be wrong. This one is not so out there. This is by Harry Wolf. It's a little harder to find. He's kind of gone into retirement as far as iridology goes. But these have all been created by people whom I either know or who know personally, but at least I respect them, right? Even I never knew Bernard Jensen, but I totally respect him for what he did for iridology. But what I see mostly happening with these charts is they fall into the trap of popular iridology. Now, here's what I mean by that. And this is a really important distinction for those of you who call yourself holistic. And I'm really calling you out on this. I'm going to move my camera closer for my Instagram people. When we are looking at these maps, And it doesn't matter which ones of these you're using, you're going to notice that some of these areas on the maps are very, very tiny, very tiny. Now, when we take that image, which, you know, on your actual map, it's going to be about 6 or 7 inches across. And when you shrink that down to about 5/8 of an inch across, which is about how big your iris is, how likely is it that you are going to actually accurately place this area right here on an eyeball? It's actually highly unlikely, because that area is, if you've looked at eyes, is probably no more than 2 or 3 trabeculae or fibers wide. So if you are tightly slightly tilted, or if you don't have exactly precisely a way of measuring where that is in the person's eye and transposing that to the map you're using, you're going to be way off. You're going to be making claims, you're going to be asking questions and making recommendations about things that are not relevant. So this is really important. These maps include such tiny, minuscule areas anatomically as, for example, the renal pelvis, which is a very small area inside the kidney. Well, here's the challenge we have with that as iridologists is we don't actually have a herb that works only on the renal pelvis, right? We actually don't have a here that works only on the inner ear. And some of these charts define inner ear, outer ear, right? The inner ear is very tiny. And so how are you, so if you see something in the inner ear, what are you going to do with it, right? How are you going to work with that? This is a very medical perspective, to break the eye down into minute, tiny pieces, into little tiny anatomical parts, and then start recommending and prescribing and speaking about those parts. I mean, that's what the medical world does. And I'm not dissing the medical world. Heaven knows we need them in many situations, but it's not useful. It's not useful to your client. You've seen a lot of people on Instagram especially, and on Facebook, offering free iris readings on these different social media platforms. They focus on tiny details. If an organ is really only 2 or 3 fibers wide, how can they be absolutely sure of what they're looking at? Being off by such a tiny bit changes the whole analysis, and suddenly, you know, the tongue becomes the eye, or the eye becomes the upper jaw, or do you see what I'm saying? That it's really, really hard to be precise with this. If we are being holistic, we need to take that step back, and we need to look at the body as an integrated whole, not as isolated little tiny areas that we could dissect out only with the aid of a microscope. So instead of that, in the early 1990s, when I learned constitutional iridology, I learned that it's a truly holistic way of doing iridology, and it absolutely changed the way I work with my clients. I did Jensenian for a full 10 years, and I was taught that if I put my client through cleanses and on special programs, I would see fibers move position in the eye. I would see colors change in the eye. And in 10 years, I didn't see anything. And I know my clients were doing their homework, and I was giving them hard homework. They were doing it. We weren't seeing any of the results that we expected. I want you to contrast these maps with their teensy weensy itty bitty, I'm going to move my camera super close, really tiny little areas, to a constitutional map. This is the map that I've developed largely with inspiration from my iridology teacher, Bill Caradonna. He created a map that was my launching point for this map. And so I've just updated the content that he provided. What you will see on this map is that with this, we are only working with organs and glands that have a metabolic impact, that will impact the whole body. Seeing a marking in a leg region, for instance, isn't going to affect the metabolism. It might affect whether that person can walk long distances, but it's not going to impact their metabolism. And they're going to tell you they've got a problem with their leg, and then you can address it, right? And by asking the right questions, you can figure that out. But I'm more interested in understanding if my client has a lung symptom, why? Why did they have that lung symptom? The eye doesn't tell me why. They may or may not have a marking in their eye. I need to ask questions because the eye shows us inherent potential. It shows us what this person has inherited from the past 3 to 4 generations. It doesn't tell us what's wrong in their body right now. Their symptoms tell us what's wrong in the body right now. So when we understand their inherent potential, what their parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents have given them genetically, and when we understand what the symptoms are, and when we understand what they're doing with their life, we can then begin to understand why they've got the symptom. We understand if it has a genetic base, and if it doesn't, we understand they've done it to themselves, right? And then we can create the program. If we understand there's a genetic base, we can do all kinds of work with that. If we understand they've just done it to themselves, we can do all kinds of work with that. Where this comes into play especially is that we then understand the interplay of the different organs. So if this client comes in with a lung situation, perhaps they have asthma, but there's no marking in the lung area, but there's a marking in the kidney area. Then we need to understand that asthma is an acid situation of the lung. Yes, there are dietary impacts. Yes, there are emotional impacts, but oh my goodness, they've got a marking in the kidney zone, an inherent marking in the kidney zone. And that is going to tell us that the kidneys may be having an impact on how this person balances their acids. So where the lung is the symptom, giving them all kinds of lung herbs and all that kind of stuff may help, but going to the kidneys and helping the kidneys to do a more efficient and more effective job of pulling excess acid out of the body is going to help the lungs far more than giving them mullein or lobelia well. Does that make sense? That when we do this, we want to be looking at this holistically. How does this symptom connect to that organ? Because the symptom's not showing up necessarily in the organ, or it might be. But this is why it's so important for iridologists to have an understanding of anatomy and physiology, rather than just an understanding of markings they see in the eyes. We have to understand how the organs work together in order to actually create a solid program for them. In constitutional iridology, first we look at the overall color, and that teaches us the general overarching inherent tendencies. So we would say that this person has a tendency to be over acid throughout his body, and that he has predispositions to the sluggish flow of blood and lymph. We can't say for sure from a picture like this if he's actually having problems in those areas. We need to have a conversation with him to see what his symptoms are and what his diet and his lifestyle are like. Holism means connection as well. So it's connecting body parts, it's connecting with practitioners and people who can help us. It's not that our practitioners are dictating to us how we are and how things are supposed to work at all. When we understand how his lifestyle is, what his symptoms are, then we can use the iridology more effectively. This person may actually have already figured out that dairy products are not good for him. We will not see any of these markings go away, even if he does cleanses and changes his diet. So the things in his eyes that suggest sluggish lymph and blood, which can show up as symptoms in other ways in the body, those symptoms just tell us how things are connected. So if this person had symptoms, say lymphatic swelling and circulatory issues and a reduced immune response, we would use diet and lifestyle and supplements to help get his body back on track. We would see an improvement in his symptoms. And that's the most important part. We would see an improvement in his symptoms. We would not see his iris change. Every case I've seen that has talked about reported iris changes, you see them on social media all the time. You have even seen them in older books that were published in the 70s and 80s. But every case where people have said, look at how my eyes have changed, when you look at them, you can see that the technology has changed dramatically. So it's things like they used very different lighting. They may have used a different camera. Different cameras have their white balance set in different ways. That affects what you see for the output picture. They may be using prints where one was printed on Kodak paper and one was printed on Agfa paper. That will make a difference as well. If they're using, they may be using a film camera. We know from years gone by that, as Kodak even still around, Kodak used to shoot to the red side. Fuji used to shoot to the green side. So even then, taking them to a photo lab, they could change the settings on their developing machines based on what they thought it was supposed to look like, right? So all of these before and afters that are showing change, when we look at things, we actually see that what changed was the technology, not the person's eye. And every scientist knows that we have to compare exact parameters, right? You have to control all the variables in order to compare your before and after. Does that make sense? There are certainly more indicators in this iris. We're not going to touch on them today. We're just going to, we've talked a little bit about the lymphatics and how that talks about sluggish blood, sluggish lymph. Now, as a Jensenian iridologist, I would have told this person that they absolutely had congested lymphatics, that they needed to do a lymphatic flush, that the lymphatic markers would go away. As a constitutional iridologist, I'm thinking this person suggests a predisposition, or this eye suggests a predisposition towards congestion in the lymphatics and the blood, which may show up as immune responses or circulatory issues. But that's a predisposition. So I need to ask the client if they have symptoms in those directions at all. If they don't, it's because this client has figured out for themselves what they need to do to control the situation, to keep their body working well. For all of the years I practiced Jensenian, where I told people with eyes like this that their eyes would change, including doing intense 10-day fasting cleanses with enemas and supplements, and oh my goodness, doing the master cleanse with the lemonade and the maple syrup and the cayenne pepper and the enemas that went with that, never once did we see eyes actually change. That was really disappointing, but that was my Jensen training. And that was a huge part of why I went constitutional. And Katie is saying on Instagram, yeah, total. Looking at the person as a whole, learning how things integrate, not looking at individual markers, because we're going to flip back an image here. Looking at this marker as a Jensenian, I would have picked on every one of these little cotton balls coming around. I would have picked on every one of these little dark areas, and this, and this, and this, and just everything. I would have picked on everything individually, and it would have overwhelmed the client. As a constitutional iridologist, we take a step back and we look at it in the context of the symptoms the client needs help with at this time. Once we've dealt with their symptoms and they are feeling much better and they've got all of that under control, they've done the right diet, the right lifestyle changes, and the symptoms have improved, which means their body is working better, then we can ask them, would you like to know more? Is there something else? And this is like 3, 4, 5, 6 months down the road. Would you like to know more? Tell me more about symptoms that you're noticing now. Tell me more about family history. Then let's look at your eyes and correlate all of that to see where you want to go next. See what you need to do next. So each base color or constitutions has a set of inherent health traits and risks. In constitutional iridology, this iris has inherent predispositions towards liver insufficiencies, along with probably some over acid predispositions. I would ask this client, liver-oriented questions to ascertain if support was needed. These eyes, however, are not going to turn blue the way a Jensenian iridologist would say. All right, these aren't eyes that say this person is full of toxicity. These aren't eyes that say this person's been exposed to heavy metals or chemicals. These aren't eyes that are ever going to change blue because we put the person on a cleanse. It's highly likely that this person is coming in with symptoms of stress that are a little bit overwhelming, and they may be coming in with some gut issues from what I see in their eyes. And if those are the two primary things that they want my help with, those are the things I'm going to address. I'm going to show them the indicators that suggest they're predisposed to being stressed out, to burning through B vitamins and vitamin C and calcium and magnesium a little too quickly. We're going to do some diet correction with that. We might suggest they maybe get a little more sleep because they're probably not getting enough. And we're going to maybe give them some nervine support to just help the nervous system work better. We might even teach them some relaxation techniques, right? But we're going to focus on that. If they're talking about gut issues, we may talk about things that they need to adjust in their diet, that they need to take their time to eat their meals, to chew their food well, right? And then we want them to go and do that homework. We want them to come back and tell us, how well did they do the homework? Do they need some more time to make the homework really a habit for them? Are they seeing results? Are they getting some benefit? And if it's yes, then we can build on that. If it's no, then we need to come up with some other ways of approaching supporting them to support their body to reduce their symptoms. Because if we reduce their symptoms, this isn't like a drug where it hides the symptom. If we reduce the symptoms using diet and lifestyle and appropriate supplements, we are actually supporting the body to do its job more effectively. Does that all make sense? Right? So I'm not going to tell my client and discuss every little thing, like what every one of these rings mean, because depending on their shape, depending on where they're situated, depending on where their endpoints are, can have meaning. I'm not going to focus on every one of these lines that radiate out, because really they typically don't mean what everybody else thinks they mean. This is the kind of person where a Jensenian would say, you've got tons of parasites, you need to do a parasite cleanse, then these lines are going to go away. No, that is not what happens. Thank you, Katie. I appreciate you being on side with the approach that we're taking. That's great. Right, so we're not going to even talk about parasites with this person, because this isn't about parasites. Parasites also don't change your DNA. If you are in your, say, late 20s or early 30s and you want to have children and you partner up with someone and you have a child, but you also have parasites while you're doing that conception and that gestation, if you're the woman, you are not passing on a parasite imprint on your DNA to your children. Parasites don't do that. So the eyes reflect only things that are genetic, not things that are transient. And parasites are transient. Parasites aren't a part of your DNA. They're not going to show up in your eye. Right? That's why toxic exposures don't show up in the eye, because they're not changing your DNA. So again, if we were Jensenians, we would say, we're going to put this person on a cleanse. We're going to see the eye lighten up. We're going to see this person's eyes actually go blue. But that doesn't happen. Pigment accumulates. Katie says, like your broken leg story. Exactly, Katie. She's been with me for a few of these. And she knows broken bones don't change your genes. They don't change your eyes. Right? So we're not going to cleanse anything out of here, but the eye still gives us a ton of information. This is a true brown eye. When we understand this foundation of blue eyes are more prone to certain chemistry, mixed eyes are more prone to certain chemistry, brown eyes are more prone to certain chemistry through the body, it gives us a huge insight into that person. This eye suggests that we've got a strong liver and blood predisposition towards being insufficient. So the liver may not be as great at keeping up with all of its detox and iron storage and bile production and immune function kinds of work. The blood also may not be great at regenerating itself, at doing everything that blood needs to do. But we have to ask those questions. And we have to ask the questions if they're appropriate. As it turns out, this woman likely has a liver predisposition that led to an inability for her to methylate her B vitamins. You go, what the heck? Your liver takes your B vitamins and it has to add a methyl group to some of them in order for you to use them properly. Women who don't methylate their Bs properly typically have a reduced fertility rate. This woman and her husband had been trying for 3 years to conceive a baby. They'd had one baby, then they had a miscarriage. When we actually gave her methylated Bs and did some diet correction with her, she got pregnant, had a healthy pregnancy, went on to have a baby, which was very exciting for all of us. So a Jensenian iridologist would say that this woman has no current liver issues just from the image with no conversation. A constitutional iridologist looks at this and says, I suspect this woman has a methylation problem. Let's test that out and see by giving her methylated B vitamins and see how that changes her wellness. Okay, so we really need to be considering the context. You know, if she wasn't trying to get pregnant, I probably wouldn't worry about the methylated Bs because she was emotionally well adjusted. She wasn't struggling in any way other than she couldn't get pregnant. And knowing what I know about the importance of the methylated Bs and how they can enhance fertility for certain women, I knew I needed to go there with her. Then we consider color variation. Now, for those of you who are with me on Instagram, again, I'm going to move my phone closer so you can see this better. There you go. Nice and close. And so we see these flecks of other color in this eye, some rusty oranges and some dirty yellows and things like that. A North American iridologist or Jensenian would say these flecks indicate that toxins need to be cleansed out and that cleansing will dissolve these pigments. I've never seen that happen, ever. Constitutional iridologists say two things: the pigments are inherent and they can become obvious, they can accumulate throughout life, but they accumulate based on inherent triggers. Every gene we have is not active every time, right? It's not active all the time, rather. We can activate some of those by lousy lifestyle or a better lifestyle, and some of them activate based on other things that are happening in the body. So when we see pigments coming up later in life, there's that inherent base, but something else is happening in the body that is making that inherent base, it's flipping that switch and turning it on. That's when the pigment shows up. And the pigment tells us by its color and its position which organ is likely having stress and is inherently prone to being stressed, and which other organs are likely being affected. So Katie's asking, so specs are not from medications or could not be activated. The specs are not from medications. Medications are not going to activate this. Unless, for example, now let me take this a step further for you, Katie, because that's a brilliant question. If you're doing a heavy med and you've got a situation where, for instance, the liver has an inherent predisposition towards struggling a bit, and this medication is really making that liver struggle, and that flips a switch and turns on a genetic response, activates a gene, then we may see a pigment begin to form. So the pigment could be the trigger that activates an existing genetic switch and makes the pigment surface. Okay. So it's not that the person is necessarily toxic, because you can do every cleanse you want and that pigment's not going to go away. It's that the body was struggling under the weight of that medication and that flipped a switch. Do you see the difference there? The difference between being toxic and between the body being stressed? They're not necessarily the same. You don't need toxin to have stress, right? And so when we look at this again, we need to understand the color of the pigment and the placement of the pigment to understand where the stress is originating and what is being activated. And Katie's saying, makes sense that there's a genetic switch. Yes. All right. I get happy when what I teach is making sense. In North America, again, a North American iridologist would say this person, again, had extreme toxicity and needed to do a cleanse, and that we would see these rings that are coming around in the eye like this, they would go away when this person did a cleanse. And we would also teach as Jensenians that if we had 3 complete rings going all the way around, the person was headed for or just coming out of a nervous breakdown. Now I'm here to tell you, in all my 40 years, I've seen a lot of triple layered contraction furrows, a lot of them. I've seen them come in younger and younger and younger children. None of the people who had it had had a nervous breakdown. In constitutional iridology, by comparison, the colors suggest inherent predispositions to liver insufficiencies that in this particular case could have an impact on digestion and on the transport of nutrients throughout the body. And, oh, I'm sorry, I can't say your name, Beharin Holistic says she sees a lot of them, or he sees a lot of them as well. Yeah, they're so prevalent. It's just how we are. But these are inherent. They aren't transient. They don't go away. The contraction furrows instead don't teach us that this person's going to have a nervous breakdown, but it teaches us this person is more likely to have sympathetic nervous system responses if they are not properly supported with nerve nutrients. Right? So the contraction furrows also suggest this person is a go-getter. They like to be busy, they like to get things done. It doesn't necessarily mean they have a mental health problem, although they may have more anxiety, but it does mean that being a sympathetic responder, they're always waiting for the next crisis. They're always ready. They're like on the starting blocks, ready to take off when that next crisis happens. And it can really affect their daily functioning. So when we look at this, we want to consider that these people do need nerve support. Holistic says magnesium and calcium. Yeah, we look for those here as well as being things that are probably quite likely there's a higher demand for those in this person. So we need to ask questions to understand, are they getting enough calcium and magnesium in their diet? Are they able to assimilate those nutrients? Or is their diet very poor and they're not getting the nutrients they need, right? The only when we have that conversation with the client to understand the current symptoms, their past history, their nutritional status, can we fully understand these markings and make really solid, cogent recommendations. We can't look at this eye and say, you have, because we don't know what the client is already doing. This person may have learned years ago that they have no room for junk food, that they need foods that are higher in calcium and magnesium, that are easy to digest so they can assimilate those nutrients. And maybe they're doing that as a habit now. And so they're just chill. Things don't bother them the way they would if they were nutritionally deficient in those areas. Is this making sense? That we really need to be aware of these things. And Barana Holistic says, would you say this person has a predisposition to diverticulitis? We don't use terms like diverticulitis. That is a diagnostic term. And I'm not seeing the things that a Jensenian would call diverticulitis in this eye either. As constitutional, we avoid terms that are diagnostic. We might ask this person, because of everything we're seeing in the nutritive zone and in the nutrient transport zone, and with the placement of a collarette, we might ask them questions about their bowel, about their stomach, their small intestine, their large intestine, things like that. But I wouldn't do that on a first appointment unless they came in with a complaint of gut issues. Then I'm going to look at that from, so you're a nutritionist here in Canada, so you can use diagnostic words. That's interesting because as a holistic nutritionist here in Canada, I cannot use diagnostic words. Interesting. You might be in Ontario or somewhere where they're a little more liberally minded. We don't get to do that here in Alberta. And so as we look at this, even if they come in with gut issues and I look at this, I'm going to wonder, why do they have gut issues? Is it because they have that predisposition towards a sympathetic response and they're always tied up in a knot waiting for a crisis? Or is it because there's an actual problem in the gut? Is the gut the root of the problem, or is the gut the messenger of the symptom? Do you see the difference? And we need to be very careful, or we need to be ascertaining the difference to get to the root of the problem. Anybody can band-aid a problem. Not everybody will get to the root. In North American Iridology, again, they would say this person has parasites. We look at these lines radiating outwards. Again, parasites don't change our genetic structure. We've talked about this a little bit. And we can't pass parasites on through our genes, specifically through our genes. You know, you might see a parasite in the body if it's one of those ones that's in the eye. Gross, yuck, never seen one, don't ever want to. But that's not going to change your genetic structure either. Constitutional iridology again says that because of the different kinds of lines and the placement of lines we see in the eyes, we know this person again is predisposed to have those sympathetic nerve responses. When we look at where other markings are placed, we also see that they are inherently predisposed to some challenges with the adrenal glands. So we understand the adrenal glands, we understand the nerve nutrient need, then we need to decide, does one of those need to come before the other, or are they happening together? So could I give this person some astragalus or something like that to support the adrenals? And would I want to give them B vitamins, vitamin C, calcium, and magnesium as well to support the nervous system? Because the adrenals and the nervous system are like this. They are so linked together, right? They are so intrinsically linked that we might need to work with both at the same time. We might also need, depending on what we see, to work on the digestion first to get them digesting their foods and their supplements so they can actually assimilate what we're giving them. Does no good to give them supplements if they're not digesting them, right? So we want to be a little bit, we want to be asking the questions that help us to understand, based on what we're seeing in the eye and based on the symptoms they've given us, to help us understand the root. What is the pathway we need to follow to actually help this person achieve the wellness that they want to have? The next layer of information we want to consider is the fiber structure. So by that, we're looking at, do they have these things that look like flower petals in their eyes? Do they have fibers that are veering off across other fibers? Do we have areas where the fibers are separated and splayed and where we're seeing dark shadow inside that? This layer of information adds to our understanding of the organ systems and their inherent predispositions. A North American iridologist, oh, I remember doing this and it was so painful for me and for my clients. Oh my goodness, and it took so long. A North American iridologist would map and detail every single one of these markings of every kind, whether it was a pigment, separated fiber, a fiber going across other fibers, a closed shape like this, which they would call a lesion. Ooh, I can't do that word. Or a lacuna, which is what constitutional iridologists call them. You know, they would map whether we had bright outlines. They would map every detail, the different clarity that we see towards the outer edge, the the congestion of stuff that we see in that outer edge. They would detail every one of them. They would announce the problem, the weakness that goes with every one of these markings. I mean, in that case, this person has problems with their brain, their pituitary, their bronchioles, their adrenals, their kidneys, the perineum, the rectum, the bronchus, the parathyroid. And they would teach that working on all of these areas would make all of these lesions and markings go away. And Berena Holistic says, this is how you were taught. Yeah. If you were taught by a Jensenian iridologist, that is what you were taught. Constitutional says, again, that the lacunae, these individual lacunae, teach us about inherent potential. So the question isn't, do you have a problem with your bronchioles? It's, is there a personal or family history of problems in this area? Because again, maybe this person doesn't have a problem there, but maybe parents did, or grandparents did, or great grandparents did, but this person's doing what they need to keep it strong and well, or they haven't done enough wrong to have an obvious symptom yet. Okay. And so when we look at that, again, we need to remember that these are markings that are inherited. Everything you see in the iris is an inherent potential, but the person has an impact on whether that potential is manifesting. Katie says, I'd be a hypochondriac with a viewpoint like that. Yeah, you know, I would do these iris analyses with these. And I've got friends that own a funeral home. And after, as I was a practicing Jensenian iridologist, I actually seriously considered keeping their business cards in my desk. Yeah, because there was no hope. I couldn't find hope in these eyes for my clients. With constitutional, I find hope all the time. They don't have a symptom. I go, yes. And I'll go through their diet and I'll say, did you know that doing this and this and this, these things that you're doing, they are the things that are helping to protect your lungs. They are the things that are helping to protect your pituitary. You've got an inherent potential, but you're doing the right things. And I can get excited about that. And then we can talk about their symptom, whatever it is. Maybe this person has a kidney issue and a kidney and adrenal issue. We can just focus on that. And we don't have to get bogged down in all of this other stuff that is scary, that's frightening, that is hope killing. Right? We can give them solid things to work on that will actually help them rather than discourage them, because their eyes aren't going to change. In North America, every marker, every fiber that's not going straight out the way it should be, every extra patch of pigment we see in the iris is a current problem that needs to be addressed. It's hugely overwhelming, right? We've got fibers where they don't belong. We've got pigment. We've got pigment. We've got pigment. We've got different little holes, if you will, in the iris. Yeah. With holistic iridology, the idea is to integrate the markings to understand how the inherent predispositions work together to create symptoms the client is experiencing. Markings may have different value and different impact depending on which markings are present. More than that, this deeper understanding allows us to really easily create programs that address more than just one symptom. So it's not one herb for one symptom, one food program for one symptom, but because we're looking at the root of the problem, because we're tying things together, we can create very succinct, very narrow programs, like 2 or 3 supplements, a couple of food choices, maybe a couple of food changes rather, maybe one lifestyle change that will have a significant impact because we've considered the constitution and how the organs work together. North American, Katie says, constitutional views sound very promising. Yeah, it is so exciting to do the constitutional with clients and to understand, help them understand that there is always hope. There is always something. Every one of us can work on something. So they're not hopeless when we do that, that's for sure. But we really do need to be doing constitutional. Lori Skaggs on Facebook is saying, this is really interesting. I'm so glad you're finding that. A North American iridologist would say this person has a weak constitution. Makes it sound like this person is delicate and fragile and doomed to a sickly life. How would that make your day? You're with a holistic practitioner and they're saying to you, you have a weak constitution. Do you just feel yourself with those words going and collapsing on yourself like a balloon that's deflating? I do when I hear those words. Constitutional iridology instead calls this a connective tissue type. With that understanding, we know we will likely need to support the digestion and recommend lifestyle and food choices to help this person enjoy excellent health. Every marking here is not necessarily important. Instead, it's the overall. We need to make sure this person is getting collagen-rich supplements. We need to make sure they're getting their vitamin C and their vitamin D. And very most importantly, we need to make sure that they are digesting their food, their good food, really well. When we take that step back and look at this picture, rather than dissecting it into little bits, we begin to understand the person as a whole. We only dissect it when we need to. When we understand and see that interrelationship again of the different constitutional markers, we can work preventively. Yes, we can work restoratively for their health, but we can also then work preventively. And that's exciting. How powerful would it be for you as a practitioner to understand the holistic potentials and to be able to create lifestyle programs that could stall off or prevent health problems? Yeah. I kind of think of iridology as being my Star Trek tricorder, because it helps me to understand the body at that deeper level. And it helps me to not get bogged down in minute details. I can do the details if I need to, but I don't usually need to. When we do holistic iridology using the iris map that I showed you at the very beginning, the dynamic iridology map is actually the very last step of an assessment. Because when we understand the color, when we understand the pigments, when we understand the general pattern of how the fibers are sitting in the eye, it absolutely gives us a foundational understanding of this person. Then we add to them what their symptoms are. That gives us more clarity as to what we're going to need to do. And then we can look for specific areas, specific organs in the eye based on the map to help us understand why the client has those symptoms. And Katie says, absolutely root level thinking. It's exactly what we want this to be. So because we do this, we can go back to the map later on if we need to. I call this health food store iridology, and that's not meant to be a put down, but it's meant, and I hope no one here thinks it is. This is constitutional, the first 3 layers that you'll learn to do in a constitutional class, or at least the way I teach it, is iridology you can literally do from 2 feet away without a magnifying device. You can see their eye color, you can get a feel for the structure of the eye, you can get a feel for the pigments that are in there. And if you work in a health food store, you can actually, they come in saying, I've got arthritis, I need a herb for that. You look at this eye and you go, yep, I understand why you would have arthritis. From a chemistry perspective, let's talk about your foods first. Let's do some cleanup there. And then let's support the organs and glands in your body that are allowing the arthritis to be there. Right? It's so easy. You can do it from 3 feet away. 2 feet away. If you need to get into the nitty-gritty detail, you're going to need to get closer and use a magnifying device. Practicing iridology using these principles helps us avoid overwhelming our clients with too much information, because I will guarantee that when you overwhelm your clients with too much information in one sitting, they won't do it and they won't come back. No one wants to come back and say, I couldn't do it, I failed. They want to come back and say, I did a really good job. I did it like 90% of the time. In the past month, I've had 3 cups of coffee instead of 3 a day. I've had 3 in total. And I go, way to go. How do you feel for that? And they can correlate that they feel differently for that. And it's always in a good way, right? They now know how they feel. They now have a reason to consider getting rid of those last 3 cups of coffee, right? To enjoy the full benefit of being free of the coffee. This helps us also to get our client programs designed right in our client sessions. One of the biggest challenges I hear and see with nutrition coaches and herbalists is that they do their intake with their client, then they go off and they spend 2 or 3 or 4 hours creating a program to bring back to their client, but they're charging only for the first and second appointment. And they're not charging enough in those appointments to cover the extra hours they spent creating the program. Constitutional Iridology allows us to create the program right then and right there that will take our client to the next step. Right? We're not trying to take them from the start line where they are to the absolute finish line. That's a marathon. That takes time. We're trying to teach them to get to the 1 kilometer mark, the 2 kilometer mark, where they can see they're making progress, they can feel it, but the changes are becoming habit for them and they're implementing them. So this becomes a mentoring situation for you with your client where they're coming back once a month for several months for you to coach them and mentor them and build the program so that they can enjoy huge success. Huge success. That's what we want. We want our clients to be successful, right? Constitutional Iridology guides us as to what questions we need to ask our clients, and it helps us to be so much more holistic in our methods with our clients. And that is so, so important. So important. Does this all sound good? Is this making sense for you? The difference between Jensenian and Constitutional. Jensenian overwhelms, Constitutional doesn't. Constitutional takes in the whole being. Jensenian looks at one marking and does something for that marking and something for the next marking and something for the next marking rather than looking at the whole being. So important. It is so important. There is I do have a program called Confident Nutritionist Dynamic Iridology. I am not selling it right here, just saying, because we're not open for registration right now. We just started a course group. And so we're getting them well on their way before we do the next start date. The next start date will likely be sometime in the summer. It's a 40-hour program. We have 20 live 2-hour-long webinars where you've got live interaction to learn the art of constitutional iridology. And there is so much more that is encompassed with that class for support and for mentoring and all kinds of good stuff. But again, just planting that seed that'll be coming up sometime this summer probably, but it's not open right now. I just hope you'll keep hanging out with me on these Facebook Lives and Instagram Lives and on the webinar, because I've got so much information that I can share with you. I hope you are staying safe. I hope you are staying healthy. Thank you so much for being with me. Thank you. And we will see you again. Bye for now.